A very pleasant good evening to everyone. It is Wednesday, June 20th, 2018. I am Biff Kensington, joined as always by the host of the show, Taker's Minion and Legends Lover, and you are tuned in to a very special edition of the Connoisseurs of Wrestling. This is obviously not a planned show, not something that we had anticipated doing this week. To be frank, I wish that we were doing this show under better circumstances, but for longtime wrestling fans, especially wrestling fans of WCW, the WWF in the 90s, Japanese wrestling also in the 90s. This is a sad day. Uh, Unfortunately, Leon White, better known as Big Van Vader, passed away. He's been suffering from a lengthy illness, had some problems with his heart for the last couple of years. He's been keeping fans kind of up to date on the different things going on in his life. He was apparently sick the last couple of days and he passed away this morning. As I kind of throw this to Taker's Minion, obviously, the Connoisseurs of Wrestling as a concept is designed to teach the history of the business to newer fans and to really inspire a love for wrestling, let them go and kind of explore, you know, what made us fans. And I think with respect to Vader, when you're talking about someone as talented as he was and as unique as he was, Vader, his career, it really is a treasure trove for younger fans who didn't get to experience what we all saw during his prime. So,
Nope.
what do you think? I mean, give us kind of just your impressions of Vader as a performer for people who didn't get a chance to see him. What was Vader like watching live?
Um, Big Van Vader, Leon White. Um, was a rather large man that I remember seeing that was able to actually do some high risk moves. He was someone that could, which impressed me. For his size, he was fast and agile. Um, and he was one of those that could make it believable. You know, I mean, I'd sit there and watch him going, I don't think he can get past this person. And when I first saw him, I was like, oh, another big rotund man kicking into the ring. What do we got here? And then when I saw his actual work, I was like, whoa, this guy's interesting. And I kind of was drawn to him because of his style. He was not a technically sound wrestler. He was not technical. He was a plain out brawler, period. He just would come in there and just beat you down. He had several gimmicks, but his main thing was to just basically beat you down, and that's how he would win. And it was just like something different in a time of transition in the wrestling industry, if you will.
Well, you mentioned, Vader was just kind of a brawler and he would just beat you down. And, you've and LL both have been watching wrestling longer than I have, but I got to say, and I'll get you to weigh in on this. Of all of the brawlers in the business, Vader obviously was not the greatest wrestler in the world. And there probably have been, strikers that are more proficient. There have been wrestlers that are tougher. But Vader, more than any other wrestler I've ever seen, had the capacity to make things look like it just murder balled you. It's like something about his size and his agility and his speed for a man that big. It just made it look like he was a world ender.
He was.
So,
thing is what you could do with Vader. If he was in his prime right now, he would give Brock a run for his money. Because there's things that Brock Lesnar does now, that Vader was doing.
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
It was almost Brock Lesnar you could see the influence that someone like Vader would have for Brock because both men were extremely big and extremely talented athletes. Of course, Brock was a natural wrestler, wrestled in high school and college. Vader was a football player. He actually played in a Super Bowl, if I'm not mistaken. I believe he played in Super Bowl 14, I want to say.
Yes, it was Super Bowl 14.
Played with the Rams, if I'm not mistaken, in that year.
Yeah, and lost to the to everybody's favorite team back then, the Pittsburgh Steelers, that had Bradshaw, Stallworth, Lynn Swann, Franco Harris, Rocky Blyer.
Yeah, so I mean, it's pretty impressive to have a Super Bowl on your resume. There's plenty of football players that transitioned into pro wrestling, especially in the 60s and 70s. But really, that's a level of success that few of the football players had. Most of the football players that played in the Super Bowl obviously were playing in football long term. Vader had to retire due to injuries, which is what kind of moved him into the wrestling field. But it is interesting to note the pantheon of great wrestlers who started out in football. Vader is, in fact, one of those wrestlers. At one hand, you can't really see it because Vader is just so big. He doesn't look like he would work on a football field. At the same time, you look at someone that big and you just imagine this guy obviously was a defensive tackle or an offensive guard. I believe he was an offensive lineman. He just a massive girth. Someone that big just should not move that quickly. Is it fair to say that Vader was probably the most athletic big man to ever compete in the ring?
Yeah, I would agree with that 100%. For the time, we've seen some very athletically gifted big men since. Vader now, for the era that he came into wrestling, he is the prototypical big, agile big man. I mean, yeah, he was a center on the offensive line in football, but being billed at 450 pounds plus for a man that big, for a man that large to move like he did, if you think about it, Bam Bam Bigelow comes to mind as another large man that could move, but there was things that Bam Bam Bigelow couldn't do that Vader could. There was just such a concept between those two, or such a difference between those two.
Or look at Hurricane, how big he was, and he couldn't do the things that Vader could. Vader could fly through the air.
Yeah. Well, Bam Bam could too, but Hurricane, also known as John Tenta, came from the sumo world, but that's another topic for another time.
John Tenta is Hurricane. I've never heard John Tenta referred to as Hurricane before.
Yes, Earthquake. Hurricane. What was it? Another one he was called Earthquake, and but John Tenta was called. I believe he was called Hurricane in WCW, if I'm not mistaken.
I know he was Avalanche and the Shark in WCW at one point. Obviously, he also went by his regular name at one point as well. Earthquake is where most people would remember him from the WWF.
Mm-hmm.
But he's another big man that could really move.
That comes from his sumo training.
Yes, it's something that you and I have kind of developed a passion for. You before I, but something that we very much enjoy.
It's my fault.
It is your fault. But when you're talking about athletic big men, we do have to make a distinction because there are men today like Kevin Owens that are athletic and can do a lot of crazy stuff. Of course, Kevin Owens was doing planches when he first got to WWE. He doesn't tend to do those much anymore, but the athleticism of bigger men, and Bray Wyatt is athletic to an extent too. We have to really clarify though, there is a huge discrepancy between a Bray Wyatt and a Kevin Owens and a Vader. Vader dwarfs Bray Wyatt and Kevin Owens. He's tall, but he's also thick. He's muscular. He's just bulky. And for someone that big, 400 plus pounds doing moonsaults off the top rope, not only does it look like it just destroys you, but it really and honestly, it just highlights just how gifted of an athlete he was to be able to pull that off. That's stuff, as you were alluding to, that smaller guys can't even do some of what he did.
Right. Well, another thing that it was alluded to, or one thing that I know that was around about him, he was someone who worked very, very stiff.
Yes.
And for those of you that don't understand what stiff means, he hit hard. That's basically what it is. So, yeah, he would. If you were bleeding in a match with him, it's not because you did the bleeding. You got it the hard way with him.
Yeah.
You know, Nick Foley will tell you, oof, he was stiff. He was stiff. There are many times that he beat the hell out of Foley. Hell, Leon Vader is the one responsible for Mick losing an ear in Germany because of a botched move that Mick made. It was a rope move that they had done before where he got hung up in between two ropes. Well, Mick slid through the ropes because they were too loose and ripped off part of his right ear in between the ropes, and it was in a match with Vader.
Vader had a couple of gruesome little injuries during his career, whether he caused them or whether he suffered them.
Yeah, knees.
Yeah.
He blew a knee out in a match. And you could actually see it. I don't remember who it was against, but it was rather oof.
Yeah, there was the knee injury. He also, Stan Hansen, we talked a little bit about Stan Hansen in our AWA episode a couple of weeks back. For those that don't know much about Stan Hansen, Stan the Lariat Hansen was legally blind without his special glasses on. He just could not barely see. And apparently during a match in Japan, there's actually a video of this on YouTube. I would not recommend you going to find it because it's gross as all get out. But Stan accidentally pops out one of Vader's eyes. There's no real, gentle way to break that to you. He accidentally knocks his, I think it was his right eye, right or left, obviously, but he popped out his eye, and Vader had to put his eye kind of back in its socket, and he continued the match.
Tough dude.
Tough, yeah. If my eyeball popped out of its socket, I would be crying from here to Kingdom Come. So, that's just kind of the level of toughness that we're dealing with when we're talking about Vader. Something interesting that was brought up during the pre-tape was Vader's beginning in the business, where he kind of got his start for Vern Gagne's AWA, the old Minneapolis territory in the 80s.
Once again, AWA pops his head. His head pops up going, I'm here.
It's a recurring theme. I wonder why with our loyal AWA fanatics on the panel here, but
it's not just the AWA, it's all Japan. Those are the two. It seems like a lot of these wrestlers got their starts in.
Yeah, it's interesting how All Japan, the AWA, New Japan to a lesser extent, it kind of keeps popping up. There was some All Japan, or rather New Japan talk earlier tonight or yesterday in the nightly thread with respect to some of the American wrestlers that are going over to Japan in the 80s and kind of cutting their teeth. Vader was one of the big names during that wave of 80s and 90s wrestlers that are kind of getting over in Japan, and he was very over in Japan.
Yeah, and talking about New Japan, he was there in 87 through 89. That was the early years. He was the first Gaijin to win the IWGP tournament or IWGP championship. He was the first non-Japanese wrestler over in Japan to win their biggest title.
And he won it 3 times.
And he won it a total of 3 times.
Yeah. So that's it's still an accomplishment that not many Gaijin competitors have managed to achieve.
And I believe that's where he got his nickname too, the Mastodon. Because he was also known. He's always been known as Vader, but he's also called the Mastodon.
Yeah, it seemed like the Mastodon was really played up in the WWF. I feel like in WCW it was a more, actually, it's interesting that you brought that up. I had a phone call with a friend just before we went on the air. He was literally calling to talk about Vader. He's a big wrestling fan too. And he mentioned Michael Buffer, like in UFC here, Michael Buffer's introduction, from the Rocky Mountains, the man they call Vader. And that's the name that always stuck with me because WCW run is where I first saw him as a fan. And that's kind of what resonated the most. He did have a lot of nicknames. When you're that big, you can have all the nicknames you want.
Mm-hmm.
But, we're talking about someone with a prolific career both in Japan, in Germany. He spent some time in Germany wrestling for Otto Bonds. I think at one point it was billed, he held championships on all 6 populated continents. Championship on every continent at some point in his career. Vader was very well traveled, very well accomplished. Ella, did you ever get a chance to see Vader in the AWA where he kind of cut his teeth, or did your first experience of him come through WCW?
Mine was WCW. Like I said, he wasn't really known as the Mastodon. That was a nickname. But he had that before he even came to the WCW. I remember he used to fight with Ric Flair, all of them. And he was damn good.
Oh, yeah. There's a match near and dear to my heart. I'm so glad you brought that up because Vader and Ric Flair, that's one match I'd like to talk about here in a little while. From Starrcade 93, a.k.a. the only redeeming factor of that show. That was in my hometown, actually. But that was absolutely one of Vader's best rivalries was with Flair. He had a lot of good rivalries in WCW. And, Taker, when we talk about, WCW as an entity, obviously, I think everyone here would agree that it is sorely missed. When you're talking about WCW, you almost separate what Crockett Promotions was from what WCW would become in the 90s. And so when you're looking at WCW's only full decade of existence, you can really break it up into 2 tiers. There's the Hogan years from 94 on. Before that, you had guys like Sting, Cactus Jack, Ric Flair, and Vader, who were really the big draws for WCW. And of all the people that wrestled, Barry Windham, of course, would be included in that. Of all the guys that, were in WCW at that point, would you agree, Taker, that Vader was probably, if not one of the best, probably the best heel that WCW would ever have in its tenure?
He was. I mean, I'm, looking at some of the information on Vader here in front of me, and, I mentioned he works stiff. There was a match between him and Sting early on in his career in WCW where, he was managed by Race, received a shot at Sting's World Heavyweight Championship on the April 12th, 1992, and was disqualified. During the match, this is what happened to Sting. He suffered a pair of cracked ribs and a ruptured spleen after taking a Vader bomb.
Oh, Lord.
Yeah, I mean, come on. Is that any explanation of how hard he hit or how hard he worked?
That's rough stuff.
But he was also one of the guys that, away from it was like he turned a switch on. Away from the ring, he was a big teddy bear. But in the ring, he became this maniac.
In the ring, don't piss him off.
Yeah, he would be someone I wouldn't want to see meet in a dark alley drunk.
No.
Oh, you think of it. He has secured the WCW title 3 times, plus the USA title. So he had quite a few championships in WCW.
He was one of the most decorated competitors they had, and he was definitely one of the most successful over the first couple of years in the 90s from, I would say, 91 to mostly 92. He was around in 91, but it was really 1992 when he kind of broke out as a big star for the company, and up till 94, and then when Hogan came in, that kind of signaled his end in 95, but he was one of the most decorated athletes they had. They definitely got behind him, and they treated him very well. I mean, they gave him Harley Race as a manager. He had a partnership with Sid Vicious at one point. Some of those vignettes they filmed in '93 weren't necessarily that good.
No.
We could talk about the White Castle of Fear if you want. No, that's not your local White Castle. That was a vignette that WCW filmed during a period where they thought the best way to promote their pay-per-views and their matches was by filming mini movies. If you ever hear old school fans talk about Cheatham the Evil Midget, that's not a euphemism. There was literally a midget named Cheatham who wore an eye patch that would cause shenanigans to unfold. He worked for Jake Roberts at one point, and he worked for Vader. And I know, hearing that now, you must be thinking to yourself, "What the hell is he talking about?" But this did exist. It's not a fever dream.
No.
All those vignettes in '92 and '93. WCW was a very strange company in a lot of respects, but there's one thing you could always believe in, and that is Vader is one tough wrestler. You know, he legitimately broke a poor guy's back in the ring with his patented move, the Vader bomb. It was accidental, obviously. He wasn't intending on crippling somebody, but, you know, Vader, you know, y'all both brought it up. Tough as nails inside the ring. Apparently outside the ring, he was a big teddy bear. Jim Cornette said he was a very sensitive guy. Of course, Jim Cornette would manage him in WWF in 95, 96 when he came over. We'll talk a little bit about his run in WWF. Obviously, there's some politics involved that kind of kept him from getting to where he wanted to be. But before we jump into that, I want to talk about some of his matches in WCW. Taker, you brought up the feud with Cactus Jack. Obviously, we could talk a little bit about that. One thing in particular that he is known for, and LL, I'm going to get you to weigh in here. If there's one person that could be considered Vader's chief rival, the guy that he wrestled the most and is probably his greatest opponent, I think we could all agree here, it would be Sting, would it not?
Yeah. Sting is another guy that played through pain.
There's not too many that could, but Sting could.
Yeah.
I mean, to suffer a ruptured spleen in the match against Vader and continue the match to finish it, that's tough.
That's next level. That's definitely next level.
I mean, today, if a wrestler were to suffer something like that, Vince would be on the headset to the referee. Take it home, take it home, take it home.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, there's none of that ruptured spleen happening in WWE today. It's certainly not with the match continuing.
No.
But, you know, it's amazing how often they wrestled each other. The running gag online and the early chat rooms and everything that Vader and Sting had wrestled, you know, approximately 62,000 times between 92 and 94. And it wasn't quite that exaggerated, obviously, but it was a prolific rivalry, a long-term rivalry, a long-standing rivalry, and it was absolutely one of the best rivalries that WCW would ever put out. It didn't translate into the kind of success that Hulk Hogan and the Outsiders would bring with the NWO. But qualitatively, from an in-ring perspective, Vader could wrestle circles around them. He probably was, with the exception of Ric Flair, the best wrestling heel that the company would ever really promote at a top-tier level. That's just my opinion. Of course, it's subjective, obviously. But, you know, when you're talking about WCW, Vader absolutely is in the ballpark of discussion as terms of the best overall performers to ever wrestle in the company. He was definitely its top heel for the first several years of its existence, the biggest heel, definitely. And, you know, it's hard not to look back on Vader's matches when you're feeling nostalgic about WCW. He was just such an important part of that company during its formative years. You know, that was Vader's promotion.
Yep.
You know, it was even more so than Ric Flair when Flair went for his tenure up in WWF. You know, Vader became the top heel, and he really didn't relinquish that role even when Flair came back. Vader was always kind of the number one. And that's what set up that match with Ric Flair that LL mentioned earlier. It's Starrcade '93. Flair had to turn babyface because there was no way his heel power was competing with Vader. Vader
No.
was just a monster, a bruiser.
He was a powerhouse.
Absolutely. That's the perfect way to describe it. I was kind of searching for that word, powerhouse. That's what Vader is. He just looked like he would wreck you because he had the strength and the size to do it.
Well, think of this. Remember at WWF or WWE when they brought back, they do that every so often, they bring all the legends in. And one of them was Vader.
Yes.
And it's like 1, 2, 3. What was it? Heath Slater? 1, 2, 3, boom. I mean, there was nothing. It just 1, 2, 3, and he was done. He's just that much of a powerhouse. And in the Legends time, you swear he was a regular wrestler again. Instead of a Legends that just come back once in a while. He could still go.
Yes, he could.
Yeah.
I mean, that's funny for the Raw 1000. Series. The legends in the back. Keith Slater will come out every week and say something about a legend. And one of them would walk out. One week it was Animal from Road Warriors. Another week it was Doink.
Psycho Sid.
And then
Lita was the best.
Leon came out. Vader came out. You hear, it's time. It's Vader time. And the crowd went nuts. I mean, even as a heel, Vader was so beloved as a character. He came out and basically inside of 30 seconds squashed Heath Slater.
He was a heel that had the organic face turn.
Yes, he was.
People loved him. Like when you come out with the legends like that. That was great. My all-time favorite on that was Lita, though, with the APA. That was good.
That Lita match was fantastic.
Yes.
That was a really fun series in retrospect, looking back on it. But, just...
Poor Heath Slater, though. He was the Kurt Hawkins of that era.
He had the one-man band, baby.
Oh, yeah. Heath Slater is very underappreciated, but, like you said, LL, Vader could still go. I mean, he just had that size, that ability. Even later on in life, he was still, the drive. He had a passion for the business. That's what really set him apart. There's plenty of football players that come in that don't seem to have the passion. Baron Corbin is probably the most prominent example of a football player turned into a wrestler currently active.
That don't really give two shits.
Yeah, well, it's like that passion and energy. I haven't seen it yet. I got to see that passion and energy before I can take him seriously as a top guy. With Vader, you never question whether he had passion for the business.
No.
Once he was in, he was in. He was a full-time wrestler, and he devoted himself to his craft.
Once he was in, he was a lifer.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that's missing. This is one of the things we've talked about off air constantly about wrestlers today. And they look at it as a business. And they don't look at it. Wrestlers today don't have the passion that, let's say, like Leon had that Jesus, The Undertaker has. Even at 53 years old, as broken down as he is, they ask him to come and wrestle, and he comes and does it.
That's what a true legend is. A true legend is somebody that had passion for the sport.
That's right.
Love for wrestling. That is a true legend.
Absolutely.
I'm going to say something that's going to probably cause controversy here. In the women's division, and this is a slight segue, and I'll get back on track here in a minute. In the women's division, there are very few women there that have the passion for this business. I can name them. Becky Lynch has got it. Bailey's got it, even though she's being booked as shit. Sasha Banks, she oozes it. Natalia, even though she's considered vanilla midget and boring, she has a passion for the business.
She has a love for wrestling. She always has.
And so does Carmella. Notice I did not mention Charlotte Flair, because I don't really think she's into it just yet. I haven't really seen the passion come from her yet.
Like we said before, we think it's because she's trying to get out from the shadow of her father. And it's going to take a while. She's trying to do that before she could show what she really wants. It's hard to do both.
Mm-hmm.
But it's so interesting. You look at wrestling, and I think you don't have to be in wrestling to understand how hard a life wrestling is. And there's different layers to this topic, really, because we talk about the passion that someone like Vader had, talk about who has that passion today, and how people, can sometimes treat this as a business and only a business. For so many others that came before them, this was their whole life. And you have different levels. There's people that enjoy wrestling that get into it, but they can't handle the lifestyle. There are people that get in it just for the money, and then they can't handle it. Brock Lesnar admits that he wasn't prepared his first time around when he kind of broke into the company back in 2002. There are people who then just bleed for the business. They just love it. They absorb it. They are sponges for it. And that's to your point, Taker, about the Sasha Banks, the Becky Lynches, the Baileys. They just absorb everything they can because wrestling is such a passion for them.
It's their life.
It's their life. That's exactly right. It's their life. And that's what made Vader so unique. He wasn't coming into wrestling with a wrestling background. It's not like he was a second generation guy. He was a football player. And that transition is extremely tough for a football player to have that passion. Lex Luger never had it. He was a big star, but he never had the passion for the business that Vader did. Vader came in, and once he was in, you put it so eloquently, he was in it for life. It was his life. And that's something that is not common for an athlete that crosses over. Vader is in that rarefied air with guys like Ernie Ladd and Wahoo McDaniel that came from a different sport and really, transcended that division between, football or baseball or whatever the case would be into pro wrestling. That's a hard transition. Even amateur wrestlers have it tough.
Mm-hmm.
It speaks to his character and his determination to be great in his craft, because that is not something easily to draw out.
One thing I've noticed about a lot of the wrestlers of the past that had the passion, the drive, it was their life. If you ever notice, there's a couple things that they did not fall back on. The pressure was there, but the pressure didn't get to them, where they went to drugs and all that other crap. They didn't have time for that. They looked at their bodies as, like God would, as a temple. They treated their bodies that way. They broke them up, but they didn't damage their bodies chemical-wise or any of that other.
Nope. And the only thing that was prevalent in the, with the old, wrestling of ye olden days was beer. They all drank. They all drank alcohol. That was the only stimulant, or I should say, anything the only thing they would ever put into their body was alcohol.
At least up until the 80s, when the drug culture did kind of start permeating.
Yeah, but I'm saying from the very early days of professional wrestling until about the late 80s, mid to late 80s, it was strictly alcohol.
Yeah.
But you had some of them that kept to that. Even into the 90s, they kept to that.
Well, Ric Flair was a lush. We know this.
We know.
But the thing about it was that it didn't matter if he got up if he came in at 4 a.m. in the morning from a night of partying. At 6 o'clock, he was down in the gym working out every day.
Because it was his life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You have to have a passion for the business to really, truly get it. Like, there are stars that, are memorable, but they're not top tier guys. And Vader, and to be completely honest and transparent, Vader is not what you would consider, one of the greatest of all time in terms of his in ring ability or any one aspect of his game, with the possible exception of his agility for his size. He might take the cake there. What makes Vader an all-time great is the drive and the determination to be excellent, which is what Ric Flair had. It's what Hulk Hogan had. I know, but that's not a popular opinion these days. Hulk Hogan had it. Randy Savage had it. He came from baseball and he made wrestling his life, and boy, did he ever make that jump. Dusty Rhodes had it. Undertaker. Undertaker is the best, best representation of that Vader ethic. Undertaker, how many times did Undertaker wrestle hurt in his career? Dozens, hundreds, maybe.
But if you're going to do that, look at Mick Foley.
There's another one.
Yeah.
He had the passion, the drive. Look at all the injuries he sustained and kept on going.
I mean, Jesus, in a match with Vader for WCW, he had against Vader. Let's see, he was concussed in the match. Because he power bombed onto the concrete floor.
Oh, that was such a sick spot.
He got concussed, and his left hand and leg were numbed. He also, in that match, he had to receive 27 stitches for cuts on his face, and WCW had to heavily edit the match because they didn't want to see that much blood. Plus, he suffered a broken nose in that same match.
I think the terminology that would be best applicable to that particular match was Mick Foley got effed up.
Yeah, he did. Yes, he did. But was Leon.
There's only 3 people that Mick Foley ever got that bad with. And that was Vader, Undertaker, and Terry Funk.
Yep.
Those are the matches he really got effed up in.
I mean, Jesus, you get thrown off the top of Hell in a Cell. They get choke slammed through the ceiling, which was not a planned spot, by the way.
Did his tooth come through his cheek or something? Or his lip?
No,
his nose, yeah.
Yeah, through his lip and into his nose. A tooth was in his, and he's still going.
They tried carrying him out on a stretcher, got off the stretcher, and came right back.
Yeah, it's that passion, that energy, and that determination to be great at your craft. Look, I'm going to say this. I think as fans, a lot of fans, and I used to be the same way, I think that we kind of miss this point sometimes. It's not my place as a fan to expect wrestlers today to have that same level of grit and determination, because wrestling is a very difficult business that's very tough on their bodies. Even today, with all the advances the company has made to protect its wrestlers medically, different rings, all of this. It's not my place to say that, wrestlers should have more passion, because it is very hard to have that passion. You have to be a very special type of individual to have the drive that someone like Vader or Mick Foley or Undertaker had. But what I will say is this. It's not my place to expect it out of wrestlers, but boy, do I miss it. I miss when wrestlers had that kind of drive and determination. There's still some today that do.
AJ Styles.
AJ Styles is one of them.
Actually, it is your place. Because think about it, as a fan of any sport or entertainment, you want to see the passion. If you don't see the passion in a wrestler or a basketball player or a football player, what's the sense of watching it? You want them to take care of themselves. You don't want them to get hurt, but you want to see the passion, the love for what they do, not just to be there.
Yeah.
That's the difference. Yeah. A lot today, they're just, I'm here. You don't want that.
Yeah.
You want to see them. This is what I love to do and what I'm going to do. That's what you want to see.
Well, you look at let's take a look at real briefly, and I'm going to consider this comparison to Leon. Okay, male wrestlers on the WWE roster that I could think of off the top of my head that have the passion that Leon had, because Leon, Vader, whatever you know him as, hell, Baby Bull Power, that was another one. Super Vader, the Mastodon.
He was big as one.
Okay, you look at today's roster, okay, wrestlers that have the passion to basically steal the show. And that's what it boils down to, is what Vader wanted to do. Every time he went out there, he wanted to steal the show.
Yeah.
Okay.
John Cena.
John Cena has that kind of passion. Not so much anymore, but I think John Cena has earned that right.
Yeah.
AJ Styles has it. Daniel Bryan has it. Kevin Owens has it. Jinder Mahal has it. Yes, I know you don't like Jinder Mahal, but you look at him, he wants to be the best. After he was released the first time, he went out, yeah, maybe he's on the juice, maybe he's not. But his wrestling skills from his first time in WWE to this last time in WWE have improved 100%. He's still not that great in the ring, but he's improved considerably, and he's showing more and more improvement each time out.
I'm going to name one that you don't like. The Miz.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Yep, you can tell it comes across from his character work these days, and he has improved in the ring too.
Yeah.
He has improved in the ring worker, but he definitely has that passion.
There's two more I can name that have it, but they're just not getting a fair shake. Curtis Axel and Bo Dallas.
They're on the cusp of something really special, though, I think. I'm so glad that they are about to break out as a tag team.
I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if they win the titles.
Curtis Axel, I think a lot of his problem is something we brought up in other shows. Family.
Yeah.
Because he's not as good as his dad.
He's third generation Hennig family.
And I think that's part of his problem.
It's a double-edged sword. You know, we're doing the countdown of the families on the nightly thread right now at Cage Side Seats. It's a double-edged sword. You know, when you're in a wrestling family, you have a lot to live up to. There's a shadow that you find yourself in, but it also provides inroads into the business, and that's another aspect of Vader's story that I think makes him so special. People, you know, it's one thing for second and third generation wrestlers to have the passion for the business because it's been in their family their whole life. It's another thing to develop that passion and that drive when you're kind of coming into it cold. You know, Vader was a football player starting out. He wasn't a wrestler. He didn't have a father or a mother or, you know, a brother or anything in the wrestling business to kind of guide him through.
No.
You know, that takes a certain level of integrity, and it takes a certain level of tenacity. You know, you have to be a special individual to develop that passion without the family connection. You know, and I know we keep harping on this point, but I think it's so pertinent to what's missing from wrestling today. You know, that passion is gone from so many. And whether that passion is gone because the company, and by the company, obviously, I mean WWE beats it out of them through apathy, or whether they just never had it. Maybe it's the fact that people today don't pay dues like they used to get into the business. I don't know. It could be a combination of them all.
It could be the fans. It's more business oriented.
Well, I think
I think I have an opinion on that. I think what's really hurt the business, you know, is you know, taking a lot of the passion and determination and drive away from people, is the guaranteed contract.
You used to have to fight for your contract.
You know, it's the same thing. It's the same thing. Sorry, honey, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
Well, like you were saying with the contract, now you're guaranteed one. Before you had to fight for it constantly. You had to prove yourself to be kept on. You don't anymore.
Well, yeah, it's the same thing in all the major professional sports these days. For years and years and years, many years, pro sports like baseball, football, basketball, hockey, they played on 1-year contract. So you would sign a contract at the beginning of the year after training camp if you made the team for that season. And that entire season you played for your next contract, which meant you went out there. Oh, if you had a little tightness in your calf or a little tightness in your hand or in your back, you went out and played anyway because there was always somebody behind you wanting to take your spot.
Branch Rickey was famous for it with the Dodgers.
Yes. This is something that is missing. This is what's missing with professional wrestling today. There is no passion to keep one's job once you quote unquote arrive. Once you get to WWE and you signed a guaranteed contract, it could be 75, it could be, most of the base salaries are right around 100 grand. And that's if you don't do any, you got to do so many shows per year to get that. But once you hit that number, you're like, well, I could take the rest of the year off. I've done my 180 days or 175 days. I've done my 175 days. I'm done. Take the rest of the year off. That's the problem.
Well,
the ones that have the passion that Leon had are the ones making the $1 million plus a year because they're there. They do their base commitment and then they give more.
Yeah. And if you're listening to this show, you hear the passion. You hear the passion that we have over this topic, and this is what made Vader so special. And this is why we wanted to do this episode because. When we look back at Vader, we see a wrestler that is the embodiment of what a wrestler should be. This is the wrestling that we all grew up on that's missing today in a lot of respect. We're passionate about wrestling. I think all three of us here could definitely say that we're fans of Vader's work just because it was so unique for his time period and unique in the scope of wrestling. But, it's the character of the person in the ring is only half the battle. You have to have a certain real life character, a sense of character. You have to have a certain level of drive to be the best. You have to have a certain level of willpower to have the commitment necessary to get by in this life because wrestling is such a tough life. That's why Mick Foley always makes it a point. He always has respect for anyone that's ever wrestled for any length of time on any level because he knows how tough it is. Vader, we talked at the outset of the show, blew out his knee and, bad knee injury, popped an eyeball out of his socket wrestling a match. Did it deter him? No. He came back and kept coming. It was during that time period when he popped his eye out. His wrestling work is what got him hired by WCW in the first place. You have to have certain qualities that not everyone has. They're not qualities that you can be taught. You either have it or you don't. And if you have it, you have to work hard to hone those talents within you. Vader really and truly exemplifies what a big man wrestler should be. He's big, he's bulky, he looks intimidating, but he can move. He can make it look real. Sometimes too real because this guy's got hurt.
Yeah.
But you look at Sting, you mentioned Sting's injuries that he had. You know what? Even though he had those injuries in the match, Sting kept right on coming because he had the drive just like Leon did.
Yep.
That's what made them so great. And that rivalry, Sting and Vader, was such a great rivalry. Cactus Jack and Vader, they had a hell of a match. And that's something we could talk about here before we close. Just some of the matches that we remember. Vader had some great ones in WCW and the WWF that are available on the WWE Network. One of the most incredible matches that I've ever seen personally, and this is flat out anyone involved, was the Ric Flair Vader match from Starrcade 93, which we talked about a little bit. Just the emotional story behind it. Vader was just a tank in that match. He just completely annihilated Flair at every turn, Flair having to get more and more desperate just to survive. When Ric Flair won that match at Starrcade 93, the story was so good. Flair didn't win the match. He survived the match.
Mm-hmm.
That is a wrestling match. That is how it's done, ladies and gentlemen. When you get someone that knows how to tell a freaking story in the ring. Vader lost that match, but Vader did not lose a single ounce of credibility or respect because he knew how to tell a story. Vader did not lose that match. He just got caught unaware. Yeah, it was a cheap roll-up win. Whatever. Ric Flair and Vader told such an amazing story. That is what is missing. Wrestlers don't tell the same level of story that they used to. And Vader told them all the time with Cactus Jack, with Sting. In the WWF, he told it with Shawn Michaels. He had a great little rivalry with Kane. You know,
Hell, he
Vader
had
and
a great
Kane.
rivalry with Undertaker.
Yes, yeah, I know. It's like, it's just, that's what made us fans. That's why we love this so much. That's why it hurts to see people, you know, especially in my case, y'all are a little bit older than I am, but I grew up watching Vader. I grew up as a kid. He was wrestling WCW. I was, 7 or 8 years old watching him wrestle Sting, afraid that he was going to kill Sting.
Mhm.
And I was glad that Sting survived. But that's the theme of Vader's run in WCW. You don't beat Vader, you just survive him. God, I miss that.
That was the story with Vader anywhere he was. You didn't beat him. You survived him and got lucky when you pinned him.
God, I miss that about wrestling. I miss that sense of wonderment that good wrestling story can bring you.
And it could be just a normal weekly match against somebody with Vader. And you would get drawn in.
Well, okay, when he has a tag team in WCW, Ric Flair and Arn Anderson versus Van Vader and Steve Austin.
That's a hell of a match right there. Wow.
Yeah.
I mean,
you talk about 4 of the all-time greats. Woof.
Yep. And like I said, that was a thrown together match, and it would suck you in because of the storytelling. I remember this, and it doesn't happen to me much anymore, but I used to remember watching, and I'd be watching at home, and I would see certain moves, and I would actually be sitting there physically moving when certain moves were hit. Like,
yep.
And I was like, what's wrong? Why am I doing? It's because I would get drawn in.
Yep.
That's one of the, back during the Attitude Era, if I had my choice of who I was going to watch, what show I was going to watch, during the Monday Night Wars, of what show I was going to watch, sorry, folks, I watched Nitro.
So did I.
Because Nitro told more story.
You were speaking of Ric Flair and Vader at Starrcade. Then you had the year before at Starrcade, it was Sting and Vader.
Oh, yeah. Dude, you could.
Clash
there are
of the
so many. Yeah.
Then you had Clash of the Champions, Ric Flair and Vader.
There are so many Vader Flair and Vader Sting matches on the network right now. Just go into the archives under 92, 93, 94. Pick your poison. Any show that you pick out of that era from WCW, you're bound to see a great Vader match on there. He had a good match with Davey Boy Smith at Slamboree 93, in my opinion.
Yes, he did.
He had a really good run with Davey Boy. The Sting and Davey Boy versus Vader and Vicious matches, they weren't the best. But then you get the Cactus Jack series in 93. That series is quite epic that you can go back and watch. I am in the minority among the people that I came up watching wrestling with. I like the Vader Hogan match from, I believe it was Super Brawl 95.
Well, you also got in WWE, you also got Vader with Heartbreak Kid.
Oh yeah, one of the best SummerSlam main events of all time.
Wasn't it 2 out of 3 falls?
And he ragdolled Michaels in that match, and Michaels stole the victory, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, he was doubted by pinfall. Vader won by disqualification. And what was the other one? I think it was a submission at the first 2. But then Heartbreak stole it.
Well, there's some politics that went into 96 with Shawn Michaels' title run. Which this isn't the time or place to get into the politic aspect of it, but
you figure he did have a run with him.
Yes,
he had a run with Yokozuna.
Had a good run with Yokozuna. Had a very interesting tag team with Mankind in the WWF in '97. I think can't remember off the top of my head if they won the tag titles together or not, but they were teamed up a little bit in '97. And then Vader, of course, one of his last big rivalries was with Kane. This was the last point in my personal fandom, because I was just at the age where I was getting too old to be kind of moved on the same level. Vader was a part of the last angle that kind of scared me as a kid. When Kane beat the crap out of Vader with a wrench, he hit him in the face with a wrench, and it was like, if Kane can do that to Vader, Kane is a monster. And it scared the crap out of me.
Yeah.
And then within 6 months, I had a Kane mask, and I was running around chokeslamming people. So that was like kind of like the last real great frightening angle as a kid before I kind of got too old and moved into my teenage years there. But
I was just browsing through the paperwork I got in front of me, and something funny I found. That's why you heard me kind of snicker. It was that because of the mask you were talking about, but it was also this I read. In '97, they were in Kuwait. Okay, WWE was in Kuwait. You know exactly where I'm going with this.
I know where you're going.
Okay, it says while in Kuwait on a tour in April 1997, Vader appeared on a television program called Good Morning Kuwait, along with Undertaker, who was then the WWF Heavyweight Champion. During the interview, the host made a cardinal mistake, ladies and gentlemen. He asked if wrestling was fake. He asked both of them, Taker and Vader. Taker, I guess, just stared at the guy like, really? But no, Vader decided
he got pissed off.
He got mad. He flipped the table over, snatched the guy up by his tie, and asked him if it was fake. Cussing him out. December of that year, he was fined for the incident. You know what his fine was?
I don't remember what the fine was exactly, no.
$164. That's what I was chuckling at. Was the fine was so minuscule? If he farted, he lost $164. That's the kind of money Vader made back then, people, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sorry.
But you look at this.
$164 was a pocket change.
You look at this. You had wrestlers that were so passionate. They're asked that question. They get pissed off.
Yeah.
Nowadays, a lot of the wrestlers, they just let it blow over.
It's a different paradigm. We live under a different world. Wrestling used to be their life, and you protected the business with your life, because if you didn't, you were out of the business. And now today, they call it the business today. That's kind of like the big euphemism for wrestling today is the business.
The smart terminology.
Well, you see
what's good for business.
What's good for business. Yeah, there's performers use it too. But you know what? Today, it really is a business. Back in the day, it was obviously a business. They were in it to make money, but it was a different type of business. It was much deeper. You had to be much deeper into it. It wasn't just your 9-to-5 job. It wasn't just your career. It was your life.
Right.
That's what's missing.
You lived the character 24/7.
Yeah.
That's what's missing in wrestling today.
Yeah, nobody expect in an era when kayfabe is dead, nobody expects wrestlers to be in character 24/7, but protecting the business, respecting the business, and living your full potential, giving your heart to the business, that's something that not every wrestler does anymore. And I think, Vader, he was in the generation that I would consider one of the last true generation of guys where you had to have that character trait. You had to live the gimmick. It was really the last generation. Once we got into the 90s and 2000s, that started disappearing with the territorial guys. And Vader was a territorial guy. He came up the AWA, wrestled in Germany and Japan before he got his big break on the national scene with WCW.
Well,
that's what I was going to say. That's when a lot of it was lost, period, is when we had the loss of the territories. Because now you're either in the WWE or you're not at all.
Yeah.
Well, and you talked about, I talked about wrestlers who have a passion for the business today, for the industry, for wrestling, for professional wrestling. And there's one name I left off the list, and it just hit me. He comes from a family of royalty in the business, in wrestling.
Oh, I know where you're going with this.
It's Roman Reigns.
And everybody
When he
shits
was that everybody shits on, but you think about it. His promos in the time leading up to his match against Brock Lesnar at WrestleMania 34, you could hear the passion. You could see it. The crowd was buying it.
because he was speaking the truth.
He had touched on something that the fans, and it's everywhere. The fans are fed up with this Brock Lesnar as Universal Champion, and it's time for a change. They need that belt. If they want that belt to be as important as they say they do, they need to put it on someone that's there week after week. So what Roman Reigns was saying was correct, but so was what Miz was saying. There's two very passionate gentlemen that are in professional wrestling today. They don't call it sports entertainment. They call it wrestling. If you listen carefully, you never hear sports entertainment come out of their mouth.
It's always a sport. It's always a sport.
If you're listening to this episode, I want you to pay very close attention to the passion and energy that all three of us have spoken of tonight. And this episode is devoted to the career of Vader. But look what happened. Talking about Vader, and I'm going to close on this and kind of making a point. And Taker, you and LL both will understand exactly the point that I'm making when I make it here. The passion that we have as fans is a direct correlation to the passion that performers like Vader had when we were watching in the 80s, the 90s, or in the 70s even. Passion breeds passion. The passion that wrestlers have creates fans that have passion. We are all three here lifelong fans. All three of us. I can speak for myself. I started watching, late 89, early 1990, in that general time period. I've been pretty much watching ever since. I'm a lifer as a fan. And that passion for wrestling, that passion that comes through my fandom, which is the reason we're doing the show right now, it's because I watched people that had a passion for the business that made it so much fun and so transcendent. The great rivalries that we talk about on this show, whether it's Bobby Heenan and his run in the AWA with Nick Bockwinkel and all the great matches Nick had, or whether we're talking Ric Flair and his great rivals, we're talking about tag teams, Bruno. We talk about all of these different legends. The reason that they're legends is because they transcend the moment and become timeless. And the only way you become timeless in this business is by giving it your full heart and passion and soul. You have to put everything into it.
Give it your all.
You have to give it your all. Exactly right. And Vader, this show is a tribute to his career. And look what, just talking about his career did for us. You could hear the passion in her voice. Vader is a prime example of why the three of us do this show. Because it's those types of characters that make us lifelong fans of the business. It's those angles, those matches, that Flair Vader match that I kept bringing up from Starrcade, or, for some people, those matches with Sting, the match with Shawn Michaels in the WWF, those are the matches that make fans for life. That they take you from being a casual observer to someone that sticks with wrestling for better or for worse. It's a double-edged sword if you're a WWE fan, but you can tell how much we love wrestling and how much we love talking about it. And that's because of guys like Vader. And that's why we wanted to do this show tonight, to kind of pay tribute to his career and his life. It's unfortunate that he didn't get a chance to get into the Hall of Fame in the WWE. I guarantee you he will be going in one day soon. If not next year, it'll be very soon.
Yes, it will be.
And he would be deserving of that honor as well. Best big man I ever saw. One of the best big men in the history of the business, to be certain. He'll be missed. But you know what? He'll also be remembered. And that is why we do this show. We want people to remember the goodness in professional wrestling just like we do. We have the capacity through the internet to go back and explore all sorts of great stuff. A lot of it, all three of us have already experienced in the moment watching it live, but that's why we do this show. It's because of people like Vader, and he will be sorely missed. It is a tragedy that he wasn't able to get to enjoy that Hall of Fame induction in person, but it's what we're here for. We will definitely be talking more about Vader's career and his matches in the weeks and months to come as part of our exploration of wrestling history. That's what the Connoisseurs of Wrestling are here for. Guys, it's been, a fun look kind of at Vader's career. Obviously, it's kind of a somber atmosphere, but, I appreciate Taker, you and LL both for being here tonight. If you're listening here, I want to thank you for your continued support of the show. I'm not going to give out any plugs tonight. That's not what tonight's all about. Tonight's just kind of a retrospective of Vader's career.
I would like to say something.
Go ahead and any final thoughts that you had on Vader as a performer.
Thank you, Vader, for what you have given us. You gave us the love. You helped keep the love of the sport alive. You given us a lot of your life, and I thank you for it. Hopefully, you're in a better place. Rest in peace, my friend.
LL said it best. I consider Vader, Leon White, a quasi member of my family. He's, was someone that took a hold to me. He was a great wrestler for his time. In his prime, he was the man that kept wrestling afloat in a time of transition from the cartoonish characters to something more real, or back from cartoonish characters to more reality based. I hope that he is in a better place. I hope he's having all the matches he wished he could have had with those that are there that went before him. It's like, could you imagine a match between
him and
Vader and Dusty?
Or Bruno.
Or Bruno.
Oof.
Or Roddy. Or Ernie Ladd, for that matter. Or Wahoo McDaniel.
I would pay money to see that show.
I mean, the thing about Vader, and I'm going to end it here, is that whatever promotion he worked for, whatever territory he worked for, be it down south, AWA, and WWE, New Japan, All Japan, he made those promotions money. He was money. You could print money with him. And he's going to be sorely missed. Rest in peace, Vader.
He will be sorely missed, but he will always be remembered. This has been a special episode of the Connoisseurs of Wrestling. Be sure to check us out this coming Sunday evening, 9 p.m. Eastern. We'll have the conclusion of our countdown on the great wrestling families. From all of us here, thank you for sharing part of your morning with us. This has been a special look back at the life and times of Leon Big Van Vader White. Go in peace. Thanks for listening. I hope y'all have a great rest of your Thursday.